Here's our challenge. Social media and preteens. Are we breeding haters? That's the question. We have 4 teenagers that are here today to discuss the impact of social media on the younger generation. Today on Conversations. Let's go to the studio. It's a fascinating thing, this whole social media thing. And what's interesting that adults don't think about all the time is how there are younger generations coming up living in this environment. We have 4 experts today on social media. Introduce yourselves, ladies.
My name's Charlene.
My name's Julia.
I'm Jamie.
I'm Joey.
Okay. Apparently, Jay was a really popular initial during that year of births. So here's the question. The kids that are younger than the high schoolers today, and we're talking about maybe 10 to 12 years old, that sort of thing, they're coming up with a social media environment that's completely different. They're kind of immersed in it, and the way that it kind of has evolved to today. And your opinion is that it's not going that well. So I'll let you start with establish the premise.
I just feel like, kids today, they're so superficial lately. And since they've grown up with, this typical standard of what they're supposed to look like, how they're supposed to act, what they're supposed to own, it just really shapes them into being kind of, in a bad shape as compared to, us who's kind of grown up with more values. We used social media back then to really share our experiences, and it didn't really shape us, in a way of how we looked or anything, but more on what we did. But kids these days just more of want to impress the general public.
And you all kind of feel the same way about this? Let me ask you a few questions. First of all, do any of you have younger siblings?
Yeah.
Yes, you do. How old is your?
She's a freshman in high school. She's gonna be 15 next
Okay,
year.
so a little bit older. But I'm curious because you say that the younger generation is growing up with a different set of values, and yet some of them are growing up in the same households as the high schoolers. So how is it different? Go ahead.
I feel like as we have more generations being immersed in social media, I feel like society is just putting too much emphasis on hypersexualizing a lot of adolescents. For example, there's always this running joke that people post on Instagram oh, she's 13, did you guys expect that? Because they look so mature. And part of that is because society, they're just forcing these young
Okay, now you're talking about society, but we're really interested about the behavior of the kids, right? And so do you think that the kids are influenced by that kind of environment? What do you think?
I'm an only child, so I'm just going to talk basically on people I know, probably people I knew back in middle school, and how they would act, or even my younger cousins.
You don't know anybody of that age that's right now that you've had any kind of interpersonal relationships with?
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know. No, ages 10 to 12. Do you know anybody like that? And do you see their behavior on the internet being different?
I think they're more affected, internally, about self-image and what they think about themselves because of what they see on Instagram or Snapchat. And
well, that's interesting.
Yeah,
you think more so than you guys were when you were that age?
I think we're also affected by it today, but I think when I was that age, I didn't really care too much about what people thought about me or trying to impress people or trying to live up to a certain standard.
Okay, what are your thoughts?
I'm the youngest, and I have
the youngest of your family?
Yeah.
Ah.
And I have a younger cousin that I could see being in that generation and is affected by it, and I feel like their generation going up and with social media with them, society's forcing them to grow older and dress older, really not their age. And
that's interesting. You think it's societal, and you think the social media society is forcing that upon them. That's interesting. Well, when we come back, we're going to dig a little bit deeper because I think some of the generalities are a little too easy to kind of throw out. We're going to take one moment from our sponsors, and we'll come right back. And there you go. If you were wondering about that, well, don't blink. So what I'm curious about is terms like social media and generation and society. I think that's a little bit too broad. And what I want to know is specifically the world that you live in right now. So when we talk about social media, I think you mentioned Snapchat, Instagram, that sort of thing. Is there any other platforms that you think are affecting the younger people more than that?
Definitely YouTube. There's a lot of
YouTube.
Yeah.
Okay.
I noticed like during like when I was in middle school, I think that's kind of the time when YouTube started becoming like a bigger thing than just like sharing like funny videos or things like that. It became more about like there's a lot of YouTubers who share like style tips or like makeup tutorials.
Okay.
And I think the younger generation is really affected by that.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. In a good way or a bad way?
I think both ways.
Yeah? You think so too?
Yeah.
Both ways? Yeah. It could be, well, okay, let's dive into that a little bit. So, watching a YouTube video, how could it be negative?
I think it could be negative if they feel pressured, like that they have to look a certain way, or even just the thought of they have to start wearing makeup earlier.
So where does the pressure come from? What do you think? I mean, do you think ultimately the pressure isn't coming from the computer screen? The pressure probably is coming from the people they interact with, right? Their peers. Does that make sense? Yeah. So do you see that? Do you feel that on the playground or at school or whatever it is, the fifth graders and sixth graders, well, actually fourth and fifth graders are actually impacted because of what they talk about amongst themselves?
I have friends, my neighbors, they're way younger, and I usually pick them up from school, and they're around that age range as well. And when I hear them talking with their friends, I could definitely see it. They're talking about makeup and just like Kylie Jenner and all this social media stuff. And when you take it into perspective, like no one's really taking the time to be a kid because they're trying to look more, older, and it's kind of like we just need to slow down a bit. Also, there's this other platform called Musical.ly, and
I'm sorry, what is it?
Musical.ly.
MUSIC.ly?
Yeah.
How about that? How about that? Okay.
And basically, it started off good, and it was just kids like lip syncing to songs. But as the standard kind of grew, these kids are trying to copy older people, and it's just really sexualizing them. But they don't really think about who's seeing it. They think about like the attention they're getting, but they're not thinking about the dangers of posting themselves.
Oh, okay. So that's a unique perspective on what could happen beyond the internet. What do you think about that? I mean, wait, let's make sure we're clear on this. So what I just heard you say is that now the younger generation is looking to the internet for peer acceptance, and they're modifying their behaviors based on what they interact with on the computer. Is that right? Okay, so that's interesting. The danger point is, what is the danger point? Is it that they're exposing themselves to people on the internet that may have bad intentions, or is it because they're not allowing themselves to be kids, as you say, at school? What do you think?
I think it's like a mixture of both, especially because I feel like that like the dangers of like child predators on the internet is really prevalent. For example, like I myself, I've been exposed to like older people, because I feel like these little kids, as they're being forced to like mature more, like it just attracts like these older people, because like they're starting to act more like adults.
That's a really good point. I like that point. We're going to take another little break, and when we come back, we're going to have your suggestions on how we can solve the problem in 15 seconds or less. So we'll take just a moment, and we'll come back to Conversations. Well, that was interesting. So now what I'm curious about is, what do you think needs to be implemented to protect children from the dangers that you see in social media? And we'll start with you. What do you think could be done in 15 seconds or less?
I just feel as if parents were more aware of what their kids were doing on social media, and if they kept track on what apps their kids went on, what accounts they have on different sites, I feel like this could be easily prevented if there were more.
Yeah, I also agree that parents should be more involved. I don't think they should be hindering them from, self-expression, or like tell them to stop wearing makeup, but maybe kind of limit like that age.
Okay.
Just like take control more.
So the first two have said parental controls. What do you think?
Another thing that should be implemented is just like raising the age limit of like what people like how old you should be before you can actually like make an account or like use an app.
Oh, that's interesting. A minimum age before you can establish your own identity on a particular platform. And lastly?
I think kids should just be more informed because right now they're just on it and they don't really know what's going on.
So you think education is the answer? Parental controls, minimum age, and better education for that actual target group. That's fascinating, and that's what we do in Conversations. All right, thank you very much, everybody. We'll see you next time. Here's the challenge. The area at a high school carries all kinds of social politics. How in the world are you able to judge or juggle that with the academic requirements? That's our conversation today on Conversations. Let's go to the studio. The climate is all political. We're always talking about what this administration or that administration in terms of the government. But I'm curious about politics in high school. And I'm not talking about the student body and all of those types of things. I'm talking about social interaction and the politics of being a high school student. With me today are 4 experts in social high school political environment, and I want you to meet them right now.
My name's Charlene.
My name's Julia.
I'm Jamie.
I'm Joey.
Off camera, we'll find out why Joey said her name like that. All right, so what I'm talking about today is what you go through on a daily basis in terms of social politics. Do you understand what I'm talking about? Do you feel there's a hierarchy in the general population of the high school? Like, are some people like more privileged, or are there some people who are always kind of like starting in the back of the pack? Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah? How would you explain it from your experience or what you've observed?
Looking at Troy, I don't know, I don't really see that. There are prominent, groups that you could really tell. Like,
What makes them prominent?
Just, the way they act, the way they carry themselves. But then again, that's also based on the individual themselves.
Now, is that the way they carry themselves? Is that confidence, or is there a different thing going on?
Confidence, and also, by the things they wear, like it's very not privileged.
Privileged,
but
okay.
It's very expensive clothing, like Stussy and all of that. But I don't know, I haven't really noticed any general differences. It's just more of different groups of people.
The way they look, their appearance.
But not
That's interesting.
really
But you also mentioned confidence, which means behavior. What do you think?
I do think that there sort of is. And by clothing, I feel like if you're involved in different school events such as Red Hots, our dance team, or even yearbook, or just ASB, people kind of value you more. And even on social media, they're the people that have more interactions and more people interact with them. And it just feels like a lot of...
Wait, because you mentioned they value you more. What does that mean?
They just see your face a lot more, and you're kind of more recognizable because they see your events and all that.
So if you have more exposure, just kind of hits, so to speak, then that gives you kind of an elevated prominence on campus?
Yeah, because they can easily make conversation. They could be like, well, I saw you on the performance on Friday.
Well, they have something to talk about.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. What do you think?
I think growing up, I watched a lot of movies, High School Musical, and I think...
Oh my gosh, I'm a High School Musical freak. Oh my gosh.
I think everyone kind of thought of high school in a certain way just because of what we were exposed to growing up when we were younger. And how there's cliques and people ruling over other people and people bullying. But what I like about Troy actually is that even though there are distinct groups of people, everybody kind of blends together. No one really overpowers somebody else.
The word overpower is interesting. We'll talk about that in a second. What do you think about social politics in high school?
Before I moved here from the Philippines, I was basing everything off of movies I saw.
How old were you when you moved here?
14.
Ooh,
Yeah.
Recently?
Yeah.
How old are you now?
17.
So 3 years ago you came
Yeah.
from the Philippines. Did you speak English?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I was just basing everything off of schools that I saw in movies. There's the popular people, the jocks, and the nerds. And when I came to Troy, I didn't really or like even my middle school, I didn't really see that. More like as separated groups, I didn't really see that. Everyone was like together. Even if you weren't in the same group, you would like converse with that person either way. Even if like, let's say Shirlane was like in a different group and I was like with the popular people, like I would still talk to her either way. And
That's
like,
interesting that you divided it up into different people and the popular people. That's interesting. We're going to dive more into that when we come back after this word from our sponsors. Well, Conversations is now diving into the nitty-gritty of social politics on a high school campus. And the last thing Joey said was that there's the popular group and the other group. So even the terminology has some sort of differentiation. So I'm curious about that. I'm going to go back to you, Joey, in terms of you all have said that at this particular school, you don't feel that there's as much of a separation in terms of a caste system, C-A-S-T-E. But you do feel a difference. Can you explain that a little bit more?
At Troy, I feel like there's a certain group of people that are like just involved in everything. Everyone knows them, and it's just very difficult to talk to them or like get in with their group. Like you could be friends with a certain individual from that group, but you can't necessarily put yourself in that group just because they're all like at this certain level. It's very hard for me.
Is that because they have commonality in what they experience, and so they have, when they talk about a certain thing, they know the other people are familiar with it? So if you came in from the outside, it would just be a matter of, I'm not sure you understand what we're talking about? Is it that kind of a thing, or is it deeper?
I feel as if it's a little bit deeper than that, but...
You know what's interesting is that you mentioned what, maybe it was this conversation, maybe it was a different one, about what they wear and how, in a way, there can be, a group can have like a uniform. And I mean, obviously if you're cheerleaders, you have a uniform, or if you're wearing your Letterman's jacket, you got a uniform. But what I'm talking about is just what you decide to put on to wear, to go to school that day. And you'll find people that kind of like are similar in what they wear. And so if that's the case, does that differentiate? I mean, would you actually not go into a group or start up a conversation with somebody that you didn't really like what they were wearing?
I'm personally not affected by like the certain like groups we have at Troy. I actually don't, like, I know there's like certain like groups of people that like, for example, like as Julia stated, like there's like Red Hots, and we have yearbook. And
well, then if it's outside of those groups, what is it that would make you not want to associate with somebody in high school?
Just like if they have a bad rep.
What kind of bad rep?
If they're into like drugs, drinking,
okay,
those certain things.
Yeah. Well, what would there be? What would you use as a criteria for somebody that you would want to get to know, or a group that you'd want to start interacting with?
I'd probably want a really supportive group. I feel like at Troy, a lot of like topics that is like mentioned is like grades, and it's just like I don't really want like friends that are constantly like comparing themselves and like just talking about grades. I want someone who I can kind of like rely on, and like we can have like similar interests, and then like our friendship will just like kind of go beyond the superficial.
You said supportive, so not critical, or supportive in a different way?
Like supportive in a different way. Like if I'm just like having a bad day and I just need someone to like, you know, talk to and like comfort, like I can just easily like, you know, like message them like via text message or Snapchat, and we can just have a really casual conversation. Like,
how do you determine that kind of quality in a human being just on appearance?
I don't base it on appearance. Actually, I feel like if you were to put all my friends in like a line, you would be kind of like baffled by how like everyone is so different. Like everyone has different fashion sense, and like it looks like they all have like really different interests.
Well, I'm really glad that you offered that example, because as soon as we get done shooting this today, we're going to line up all of her friends, and we're just going to see what the deal is, and I'm sure they'll all be into that. So what do you think? Positive or negative, how do you determine like who you want to interact with, or who you now want to stop being a part of?
Well, like my friend said before, clothes to me, it really didn't really matter. Like I don't look at that.
But are the clothes indicative of the person? Can you judge a person by, does what a person wears tell you something about their personality?
I guess, but I don't really look at that. It's more of how they carry themselves in the clothes that they wear.
We're back to that, how they carry themselves. That's interesting, because when you first started, you said that there are certain ways that people will carry themselves. Maybe it's confidence, maybe it's, that's kind of an interesting thing. Well, I don't think we've solved anything here today, but that's really why we have these conversations, is so that we can dig a little deeper and maybe get to what really matters. Thank you very much for tuning in. We'll see you next time on Conversations.